We're gonna pick a random product from the Amazon search page, and we're going to model, texture, and render this in Blender. If you're trying to make some money with Blender, this is the best way to do it. And if you want to learn more about the modeling tools and techniques that you see me use in these videos, then check out my new Blender ebook, the link is below. Now luckily we got all the references that we're going to need for this project on this product's Amazon page. We got this picture over here that we can use as a background reference, and that way we can determine the length, the height, and all this different shit. We got a back view, we got a bottom view over here. We even got a 360 collection of images that we can use to check the various details around this model. We're gonna use this to look at the sides of the speaker and also these buttons up here. If you're lucky like me, you're gonna take this window and you're gonna place it on your second monitor. Otherwise, you're probably gonna have to get pure ref and keep a little window open in your corner all the time. But we're going to open up this front view image, right click, save image as. I want a new folder just for this project, and then I'm going to save my references, my textures, my normal maps, and all this other stuff that I'm gonna need for this project into this folder. Now let's go to Blender front view, then press Shift A, image, reference, and load up this reference that we just saved to our computer. I want that to be slightly transparent. I'm gonna place it on top of the axis here, and let's push it in the background so it's not in the way of anything. I don't want the default cube, instead I'm going to use a cylinder, and I think we can try something like 16 vertices because we are obviously going to subdivide this. The problem is that we're going to have to make these curves over here, so we are going to have enough geometry on our cylinder so that we can align the vertices from the side of that cylinder with this line over here. So let's try 16, and if it's not enough, I'll just replace it with a higher poly circle. We're going to rotate this cylinder sideways. Let's just cut it in half right away so we can use a mirror modifier. Add the mirror modifier y-axis. I'll get rid of this face on the side for now. We're going to push this edge loop all the way to the side out here. I'm going to use my 3D cursor as a pivot point, and I'll snap it over here to this vertex. Then I'll scale the cylinder down towards that vertex so that it aligns down here and also up here. Now we're just gonna have to slide this geometry so that it aligns with the reference image. It's not terribly important for me that this is super realistic because I'm just trying to demonstrate how to do this for the video. But if you guys are actually hired by JBL, they probably don't want to see you fuck around and make some imperfections. They want to see their exact speaker on a 3D model. So the best kind of reference you could get is if you had the speaker on your table right in front of you. I don't have a boombox in the house, but I should buy a boombox because if I showed up to a party with a boombox, I would be in charge. So that's a good strategy for pulling up the house party that I just thought of right now. I know most of you people that watch me don't party, just spend all day on the computer. Now let's see what happens when you subdivide this. This curve doesn't match perfectly over here, but that's fine because we're going to apply a little bit of subdivision surface in a moment, and then we're going to be able to use that new geometry to perfect this curve. So let's just use one level of subdivision. I want this edge loop to be larger over here. We're going to push it down a little bit further. I think it's better if I get rid of the mirror modifier and I just keep my geometry in real time, because that way it'll be easier to control this segment in the middle which connects everything. I can also bevel that. I'm going to make this a little bit larger, and I want these to be larger as well. And once we have more or less the right shape, I'm going to duplicate this and push it to the side somewhere so we have that as a spare in case we fuck something up. Let's apply one level of subdivision surface, and now as you can see we got some more geometry that we can work with. So now I can use my proportional editing up here by pressing O or by clicking this button, and then I can push some of this geometry further to the side so it aligns with this curve a bit better. Keep in mind that we also have geometry in the back, so you can't just select the vertex because then you're only moving this vertex in the front, and the back stuff is not going to change. So you have to box select or use your brush tool in wireframe mode, and that way you're making the changes the way that you should be making them. Now once we got more or less the right shape, let's delete one side, and now we can bring out the mirror modifier again, and I'm also going to add some more subdivision to this just so it looks a little bit cooler while we're modeling. So here's what we're going to do next. I'll select this edge loop at the end here, Shift S to snap the 3D cursor to the middle of that edge loop, then extrude right click and scale this down a little bit so we get a little edge here. We don't want this edge to be too round, so we're going to select it, and with Control B we're going to bevel it, and I want that bevel to have a shape of one and only two segments. Now we've created a little gap here, and we're going to take some of this geometry from here like this, select the edge loop, Shift D, P, and separate that to a new object, and now we can use this new geometry to create this shape out here. So we're going to extrude that, right click. I'm not using proportional editing anymore. We're going to take it to the side like this, scale it down on the y-axis, scale the whole thing down a little bit like this. We're going to check from top view to make sure that we don't curve this inwards too much, but now we're going to align some of this outer geometry with this curve that you can see right here. We're going to check all around this model to make sure we didn't mess anything up too much, but I think it looks okay. Now with Control R, I want another loop cut like this, and then with Alt S, we're going to slightly inflate that new loop cut, and that's going to make this part a little bit thicker, which as you can see is kind of what we need to have based on our reference over here. You can even maybe add another loop cut and push it all the way to the end. We're also going to inflate that, and that's going to control the shape right around this little gap between the speaker itself, or the fabric on the speaker, and these plastic plastic parts on the side. Now we're going to repeat the same thing we did earlier over here on the end. Extrude, right click and scale it down to create this little round edge on the end. Again, we're going to add a small bevel right there. And once again, we're going to have to duplicate this edge loop separated to new object. And we're going to repeat the same process one more time to create this last bit over here. So let's also slightly scale this down so it follows this curve here as well. And of course, from side view, we're going to align the geometry here again. We got this little part sticking out down here, so we're gonna have to push these vertices a little bit further out. I'm trying to keep my topology reasonably clean for this because I am using a subdivision surface modifier. And as we all know, if you have bad topology and you're using modifiers, especially subdivision surface, you're fucked. So make sure you learn about topology and how to do it correctly. Go watch Thomas Colin 3D. He's an expert. He's not a savage like me. I just make whatever looks good. I'm Balkan. This is how we operate. He's French, so he's more civilized. Again, let's do an edge loop over here and inflate this a little bit. Now, I'm going to go back to Amazon and pull up this 360 reference, and then I'll enjoy the luxury of having a second monitor, so you guys won't see the reference, but you can see what I'm doing, and you can also load up the reference yourself on Amazon. Now, the side of the speaker is going to be something like this. We're going to extrude this edge loop, right click, scale it down, then extrude, right click one more time, and push it inwards on the y-axis like this. We're going to scale this down to 0 on the y-axis, so it's a perfectly straight circle, and we have some edges sticking out on the inside over here, so we're going to slightly slide this inwards. I want another loop cut like this, and this looks very different when you add smooth shading, so let's do that to get a better idea of what this is going to look like. I'm looking at my reference right now because this looks kind of dirty and jagged when you look at it in Blender right now, but based on the reference, I think it looks pretty damn good. So once we add the rest of the details here, I think this is going to be perfect. There are some imperfections, however, that we probably have to fix, such as this vertex being a little bit too low, so we can just lift that up a little bit to clean it up. And it's a little bit too pointy, so we're also going to pull some more of this geometry backwards a little bit. Now it's going to be a smoother curve and it's going to look a little bit cuter. Select this inner edge loop over here, go to W Loop Tools Circle. This is going to turn it into a perfect circle. If you don't know about loop tools and how they work, I explained all of them in detail in my ebook. If you're too broke to buy an ebook, you can just Google it too. Now let's make a little game plan for how we're going to create this shit on the side here. We have a flat surface underneath this, and then there's like this disc shaped thing, and on top of that disc shaped thing you have these lines carved out in a circular shape, and then there's this little exclamation mark, which is the JBL logo or whatever. This is the part that moves back and forth when you place something on the speaker, and this is what creates the base. We're going to create a normal map for the carved lines in the background, and then we're going to just model out a simple surface like this and place it on top of this thing. Now before we get to all that, let's just finish modeling some of the other stuff that we have around this model. So we still have to add the disc, the handle, these little rubber grippy things, buttons. I can also see that the logo here is 3-dimensional. So we're going to model that out, and I'm going to show you how to apply that to a curved surface like this. So over here, let's fill this face. We're going to bevel the edges on the side with Control B to make this a little bit smoother. Then we're going to duplicate this circle and scale it up a little bit. Extrude this outwards, inset this face a little bit and push that outwards a bit further. Then to prevent these wrinkles, we're just going to inset it one more time. Maybe we can create a large bevel over here just to control the shape of the edge. And now let's take this and push it a little bit further inwards. I want 2 more loop cuts over here, and then I'm going to use that new geometry created by those loop cuts to select a surface on the top here, inset that, delete the geometry on the inside, and we're going to use this gap that we created here to create this little kind of hole where the handle is fitted into. I want to straighten this out, so I'm going to select the first and the last vertices. I'll join them with J, then we can delete this, and I think this is supposed to be curved like this, so we're just going to leave that. Then we're going to extrude this, right click, lower it down a little bit, then we're going to extrude it again, right click, scale it down, and let's go to face, grid fill, just so we have a clean fill for this. I'm going to slide this edge up and maybe scale this down a little bit further because I want to make this a bit smoother. This edge segment has to be beveled because the outer edge here has to be sharp, and something like this will do. Now let's take some geometry from here because we want to keep this exact shape. We're going to duplicate that and separate it to new object. We're going to use this geometry to shape out the bottom part of this handle. We're going to use Alt S to deflate this a little bit to push it inwards. Check even offset. Now we can push this inwards a little bit, extrude the back part, maybe lower this by sliding it with double G, fill this, then we're going to extrude this and lift it up a little bit, and we're going to align this in such a way that we can use the geometry in the front here to extrude the handle itself. Let's go to face, grid fill to fill this part at the top here. We're going to lift this entire surface up a little bit to add some curvature. Now it's way too thick, so we have to lower it down a bit. This is the tedious type of shit that's not really worth talking about. There's not really much to say here. You're just gonna have to figure it out. Now we can extrude this and bring it out here. I'm gonna delete the face at the end. You want to make sure that your edge loops aren't really zigzagged. You want everything to be clean and straight. We're gonna have to slide this around a little bit so it's placed a bit better. We're gonna push these forward and this as well, and then we can make everything a bit smoother and cleaner. It's gonna make a big difference when you subdivide this. Let's press K, click here, press C to cut through, then click down here. That way we can delete this geometry and we have a cleaner cutoff. So looking at my reference, this handle does not get wider, but it does get thicker if you look at it from the front. So when we extrude it and bring it over here to the middle, we can scale it on the Z-axis, but we can't scale it on all the axes because then it's going to get wider. Place the 3D cursor in the middle, scale this to 0 on the Y-axis to bring it to the middle. The origin of this handle is not exactly in the middle of the speaker. That's why we have this intersection going on. So we're going to place the 3D cursor on the origin point of the speaker, which is the middle. Select this object, go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D cursor. Now it's exactly in the middle, so now we can connect this a bit more smoothly. Let's scale this up on the Z-axis and lift it up a bit further. I want some more geometry here so I can control the shape better. Lift this up. This has to be a little bit thicker. This has to be lifted up a little bit. I think this looks pretty good, but maybe I'll make some minor adjustments later. Notice how the shading on this handle doesn't really match the rest of the object. That's because the normals are inverted, which basically means the faces are facing inwards. We're going to select everything in edit mode and press Shift N to correct the normals. From top view, we're going to take some of this geometry and slide it with double G, then slide it backwards. That's going to make the end here a bit more curved. We can also push all of this forwards, and now this shape is a little bit more smooth and round. I'm going to add a loop cut in the middle because it slightly changes the shading and the appearance of this shape. And let's also add an extra loop cut at the base here just to control this part of the handle. Now this shape is more or less ready. Let's apply the mirror modifier, select everything, merge vertices by distance with M. Then we're going to duplicate this, and on the duplicated object, we're going to apply the subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels. This is because we need some extra geometry to make these grippy parts down here. Now we're going to select some of these vertical edge loops at the top and the middle of the handle, duplicate those, right click, then press Ctrl I and delete everything else. Now we have these individual segments of this handle. We're going to select all the vertices that are exactly in the middle, and we can do that by going to side view and using our box select tool with B. Then press Ctrl plus a couple of times to expand the selection, and with Ctrl I, we're going to invert the selection and delete all the other vertices. Now if you want to, you can add another subdivision surface modifier, go to Object, Convert to Curve, and now this is no longer a mesh, this is a curve. So we can go to the curve properties, open up the geometry menu, and increase the depth value to add some thickness to these curves. Object Shade Smooth. I think a depth of more or less 0.01 looks pretty good. Maybe we can add a little bit more, but something like this will do it. So now that we have some thickness on this object, go back to the Object menu, Convert, Mesh, and now this is a mesh again. So we're going to select all the edge loops at the end of each of these worms, press F to fill, then get rid of the second edge loop in line, select one of the faces at the end, Shift G, select similar area, set the threshold to something very low, and then press Ctrl B to bevel this. The bevel has to have a shape of 0.5. We're going to get rid of any of this extra geometry by just sliding it to the end, select everything, merge by distance, and now we have this grippy rubber shit. We deleted one half because I don't want to do this twice, so I'll place my 3D cursor in the middle, Shift D, right click, scale to -1 of the x-axis, merge vertices by distance, and invert the normals. Even though this is not realistic, I'm going to slide some of these edge loops up and down a little bit, just because I want these curves to match. I think it looks a little bit cooler that way. Again, since I'm just doing this for you guys for the video, I don't have to make this completely realistic. I can do whatever I want, so that's what I'm gonna do. We also have something similar going on at the bottom here, so let's add a plane, rotate by 45 degrees. Let's do a couple of loop cuts like this. Then from top view, I'm going to make a few knife cuts to cut this off. Same thing on this side. Also cut off the top and the bottom, and now we have edges which very much resemble this rubber shit at the bottom. So select the outlines of this shape, X, delete edges, subdivide each of these edges a couple of times, add modifier shrink wrap, target the speaker, and set the wrap method to target normal project. Now these lines are going to wrap around this surface. Apply the shrink wrap modifier. You can use your individual origin scaling to scale down the edges at the end, and also maybe cut off the edges on the corners. This is going to make it look a bit more round. Now again, go to Object, Convert, Curve, add a little bit of depth. It looks like something around 0.03 is going to work well for this. Object, Convert, Mesh. I'm filling all the circles at the front and the back of every single worm. Now again, we're going to select all the end faces, and with Ctrl B, we're going to bevel them. Make sure you set the width type back to offset, which is the default. We got our clamp overlap activated to prevent anything from overlapping. And this way, they're going to meet in the middle. So we can just select everything, merge by distance, and look how cool that looks. If you want to, you can add a subdivision surface modifier, but you don't have to do that. Let's start modeling out the buttons, the logo, and this exclamation mark on the side. Here's how we're gonna do that. To do that, we need to go to Google and we need to type in JBL logo. Find a picture of the logo like this and save it to the computer. And we're not gonna bother looking for pictures of these buttons, so I'll just screenshot that, save as, and now we got the references that we need for the next step. Check out this video that somebody else made for JBL. They got a fucking rock which explodes. They got a low resolution video, but then it falls apart and opens up. You got the base shit on the side. You got the sand popping up. It looks pretty cool, doesn't it? And the model that we're creating here, you can do animations like this with that model. Obviously, if you want to do the explosion shit, it's gonna take a little bit more work, but you get the idea. This person who made the animation, he got paid some good money. So let's go to top view, Shift A, image reference. Let's load up the logo reference. We're gonna make that transparent. Now you can just add a circle. Let's do something like 16 vertices because we're gonna subdivide this. Face, grid fill, then duplicate this vertex, lift it up, extrude that to create this triangle, fill the triangle, then bring a vertex down here, turn it into an edge. This is probably the stupidest way to make something like this, and I know somebody in the comments is gonna tell me a better way to do this, so maybe it's time that you guys educate me on something. Once we modeled the letters, let's select all the outlines around every one of the letters. Press N to open up this menu on the side, set the mean crease to 1, correct the normals. Now you can extrude this up to add some thickness. It might be a good idea to add some more geometry so that the geometry is evenly distributed on all parts of the mesh. We're going to place a 3D cursor to the front of the speaker. Then we're going to snap this to the front of the speaker, rotate this to bring it into place. So Z-axis, Y-axis, and all this. We can use the reference in the background to figure out the placement for this logo more precisely. It looks like the proportions are a little bit different from the reference that we use, but who gives a fuck? It's gonna look good anyway. Now add a shrink wrap modifier to these letters. Lift that above the subdivision surface modifier. Target the speaker. The project wrap method is gonna work the best for this. So now we can just push this backwards and it's gonna be wrapped onto the surface nicely. Now apply the shrink wrap modifier. You can also apply the subdivision surface modifier now. And just extrude, right click, Alt S to add some thickness. And you can't tell me this isn't one of the coolest things you ever seen in your entire life. You can get rid of the creases now. And now just to add an extra dimension of coolness to this text, we're going to add a small bevel around all the edges around the letters. Admit it, this might just be one of the coolest things that you ever seen in a Blender tutorial. Hit the fucking like button if you haven't already. Have you no shame watching this video this far in and still not liking the damn video? Now let's open up the other reference image. This one's got some buttons on it. We're looking at them from a weird angle, so let's just try to model them one by one. First of all, we need 2 circles side by side like this. We're gonna delete some of the inner geometry on those circles. With the 3D cursor placed up here, we're gonna scale this edge to something like 4 or 5. And then we're gonna do the same thing on the underside here. We should probably lift this up a little bit, and we can maybe extrude these edges to bring them inward. Now let's convert this into a curve. Then in the curve properties, we're gonna add some depth to this. Something like 0.36 is gonna do. I'm gonna set the resolution to the lowest possible setting. Then when I convert this back into a mesh, I can delete the edges at the bottom. Then I can flatten this, also delete the inner edge loops. Now I can extrude this up to add some thickness to it, but we're gonna do that later once we have all the other shapes as well. To make this look a bit better, I'm also going to bevel these vertices on the corners like this. Now let's use an edge from over here. We're gonna rotate that and extrude that into the little minus shape. The reason we use an edge from here is so that we can keep the same thickness for the line. Then copy the minus, bring it over here and shorten it. And we're going to turn that into a plus by just manually modeling it and doing whatever we gotta do. Lastly, we got a play button, so we're just gonna use some geometry from the plus again to make this little triangle. We're gonna extend these vertices, then turn on this little tool over here and in options check split edges and faces. Now just press G and click without moving it. And we got a little intersection here so we can cut off these. And now we can turn this into our play button by just extruding it inwards and deleting the interface. We also have this power and Bluetooth button in the middle, so we're going to use a circle with some double vertices in the middle. Then we're going to push 1/2 of the circle to the side, and now we got the right shape. Once we have all the shapes, let's connect them to the same object, correct the normals, and we're going to extrude them simultaneously so we get the same thickness on all of them. These are so small that the curvature of the speaker is not really going to affect them, so we don't have to do this whole shrink wrap modifier scene. We can just kind of put them into place and they're going to be all right. So place the origin point of this object back here in the middle, snap the 3D cursor somewhere around here and snap that shit over there, rotate by 90 degrees or whatever, and now I can just adjust the size. It has to be about this big. I also added this little thing down here. I'm not gonna show you that because I don't feel like it. Since we're talking about skipping, I'm also going to skip this part in the back because I've been sitting here recording this video for probably about 2 hours, but now we're gonna move on to the texturing. First of all, let's talk about this thing on the side here. We're gonna need a normal map with these lines. So to create that normal map, we're going to first create a plane. We're gonna subdivide that plane a bunch of times like this. And now select the vertex in the middle of the plane. Press C to activate your brush select tool and scroll up to increase the size of the brush. You wanna make this as big as possible. Make sure it's exactly on the middle of the plane. Click, then do right click, Control I, and delete all the other vertices. Now select one horizontal edge loop and press Shift G, select similar direction, and now you have all the horizontal edge loops selected. Now you can press Control I to invert the selection, X delete edges, so now you have only the horizontal edges remaining. Now again, we're going to convert into a curve. We're going to add as much depth as we can. It looks like something like 0.015 works best in this case. Then convert this back to a mesh, and we need a quick and easy way to select all the ends of these little tubes. So select one edge loop, press Shift G, select similar amount of adjacent faces. Then press F to fill each one of these faces. Control B to bevel, merge vertices by distance and correct the normals if you have to, and we're going to delete the entire upper half of this entire mesh. So to accurately select that, we can just use our box select tool, delete the top half, object, shade smooth. I want the normals for this to be facing upwards because we're going to bake this as a normal map, and that way we're going to have these little trenches over here. We can probably make this look a little bit cooler by selecting some edge loops like this and slightly scaling them down, because that's going to make the corners look a little bit smoother. Now we just got to add a plane above this, and we're going to bake this as a normal map. We're also going to skip that because we showed this way too many times. So if you want to learn how to bake a normal map, check out my other tutorials where I do that, and it's all going to be explained over there. Once we got the normal map baked, we just have to apply some very simple materials to this object and we're going to be fine. We also have to make this little exclamation mark. Luckily we already got one, so we're just going to select this, duplicate it, separate to a new object. We're gonna have to flatten this because it's currently curved because of the speaker, and now we can just place this on the end of the speaker with a 3D cursor. So first of all, let's take care of the basic colors. Create a new material. We're gonna call that gray plastic. Set the color to something dark gray like this. I'm gonna reduce the roughness a little bit. Then I'll select these shapes on the side. Then shift select finally the handle. Control L, link materials, and now they all have the same material applied to them. The buttons can also have the same. I'm just going to use a custom texture that I made in PaintNet for this power button and the Bluetooth button over here. We're also gonna use that as an emission map. We're gonna get to that in a second. This needs to have a different material. It's gonna be called metal. It has to be gray, and we have to crank up the metallic value. The main body is also going to be dark gray, but we're going to need a normal map for the fabric. This can also be metal, except in the middle we're going to select a little face, add a new material to that, which is going to be white, and we're going to increase the emission so it's glowing. This has to be gray, and these things down here have to be bright orange. Now let's start applying the normal maps. We're going to select this shape at the end here, add a new material slot, load up the gray plastic again, assign that, and then duplicate that second version of gray plastic. We're going to call that speaker side or whatever. In that speaker side material, we're going to load up an image texture node, and in that image texture node, we're going to load the normal map. Then add a normal map node, color into color, normal into normal. It's going to help if we separate this to a new object and apply the subdivision surface modifier, because now we can just mark a seam around here, L, U, unwrap, and then in the UV editing workspace, we can adjust the UV map, and this way the lines are going to be placed correctly. This exclamation mark needs a bright gray color. I don't know if it's supposed to be metallic, but we're going to make it a metallic anyway because I think it looks cool. And it turns out that the sides of these letters have to have a red color. So we're going to select all the edges around these letters, create a new material for that, assign it there, or as a matter of fact, we can use the same orange color that we use for this rubber up here. We also need a special normal map for this fabric. Luckily, I already baked this in another tutorial. I'm pretty sure this is somewhere on my channel. If it is, then there's going to be a screenshot of the thumbnail on this screen right now. If not, then it's not going to be there. Shift A, image texture, load up the fabric normal map, color space, non-color, normal map, color into color, normal into normal. I'll now apply the modifiers on this thing. That way I'll be able to mark some seams, UV unwrap this, and then the UV editor I can just scale this way up, and now we got this cool pattern for the fabric. We're gonna make that a little bit darker and it's gonna be a little bit more rough. I got my special power button texture over here that I plugged into the color for the gray plastic material, which means we're gonna have to make a new version of this material and call it buttons, and the actual gray plastic material shouldn't have this because otherwise this texture is also going to be displayed on the other parts of the speaker. But this way, my UV editor, I can only apply this to the power button itself. It should look something like this, and all the other parts of this UV map, we're going to scale those way down and place them on some black part of this texture. And now we got a beautiful power button and everything else is black. We're also going to use this as an emission map, and that way the white parts of this texture are going to glow in the dark, while the black parts are going to be dark. That's it. This thing is fully textured. You're going to be able to download this on my Patreon page. I'm completely burnt out mentally from doing this and sitting here for the past few hours, so I'm going to go rest my mind by doing some heavy deadlifts. Meantime, go check out the fucking ebook. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the damn video, let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next one.